world bosses, wave bosses, tons more enemies, world building, biomes, weather effects, and even loot goblins. I've poured hours into my upcoming game Nanoplanet Survivors over the past 4 months, and I'm excited to tell you all about it. But before I dive into the details of all these awesome features, my game is now up on Steam, and it would mean the world to me if you'd go and wishlist it. The link is in the description below. Now, a lot has changed with Nanoplanet Survivors, and most of it is for the better, but unfortunately the timeline isn't one of those things. Originally, my plan for Nanoplanet Survivors was to release a demo of it to Steam Next Fest in October. Unfortunately, I missed the application deadline by a week, so I decided it was in my best interest for me and my game to postpone my launch until the February Steam Next Fest. I was 2 weeks out from February's Steam Next Fest, and I was putting the final touches on my demo. I decided it'd be a smart idea to have a couple friends and people from the Discord playtest it. Unfortunately, they found so many bugs. Due to all the bugs and how little time I had to work on it outside of my day job, I didn't think I'd be able to get them all fixed in time for February's Steam Next Fest, so I pulled the demo from the fest. It was a really crappy feeling, especially since I was able to actually end up resolving the bugs with plenty of time left before the fest started, but I guess I just panicked and made a rash decision. The lessons were learned, and I guess that's what game dev's all about. But on the bright side, I do have an updated timeline for Nanoplanet Survivors. That updated timeline looks something like this. This is version 0.5, and it's about bosses, biomes, and loot goblins. Version 0.6 will be about abilities, characters, and even more abilities. Version 0.7 will be about introducing a new stage to the game, the spaceship stage. Version 0.8 will be about introducing the final stage of the game, which will be like the black hole stage. Version 0.9, I'll be reworking the pet mechanics to add pet catching, progression, and customization. And version 1.0 will be the full release of the game, and in that update, I will fill in the weakest links based off the feedback and playtesting from the previous versions of the game. Speaking of playtesting, I have a small list of playtesters that I'm giving out Steam keys to. If you'd like to join that list, then join the Discord channel in the link below and reach out to me. I'd love to get your feedback. Now on to the good stuff, bosses. In the previous devlog, my plan was to have 3 bosses, one at the 10, 20, and 30 minute mark. These were partially implemented during that devlog, but one of the most common critiques I received from my playtesters was the lack of enemy variety in my game. I leaned heavily into this and added 6 more bosses and 6 more normal enemies to the first stage of my game. There are now 22 different enemies in stage 1 of my game, and 9 of them are bosses. There are 3 types of bosses. The first type of boss is the world boss. These are the second most powerful bosses in the game, and they live in various biomes around the stage. More on biomes later. The second type of bosses are wave bosses, which will spawn periodically when the player reaches certain wave numbers. And the last type of boss is the final boss at the 30-minute mark. This boss is almost unbeatable and serves as a definitive end to the round if you can even make it that far. Now let me explain a little more about each world boss. The 2 existing bosses were the large slime boss and the large dragon boss. These have been converted to world bosses and keep their same mechanic. There are 2 more world bosses that are new. The ice boss is a new world boss that looks like a 3-eyed white walker that shoots fast ice shards at you, which will slow you down on impact. And the last new world boss is the flower boss, which slowly grows an infestation of thorn roses all around her, which block her from receiving damage and poison you on impact. She also shoots poisonous flower projectiles at the player, forcing the player to be smart about where they move to dodge her projectiles while also avoiding the rose thorn traps she's laying. So now that I have these 4 world bosses, I wanted to give the player a reason to go looking for them. I added a low profile dialogue banner that appears throughout the round that serves as a tutorial and gives the player lore about the world and their objectives as they communicate to and from their crew, which are orbiting in a spaceship above. At a certain point in the round, the crew will communicate to the player that they need to find and defeat these world bosses, at which point the player will get an arrow indicator pointing towards each world boss. Once all the world bosses have been cleared, the player is then directed to find their way back to the landing zone where they will be extracted, and this is how you unlock stage 2 of the game, which is the spaceship stage in version 0.7. Now that I had implemented world bosses and a way for the player to know to seek them out, I added wave bosses to the game. These are basically just souped up versions of the regular enemies that hit harder and can take many more punches before falling down. The first wave boss I implemented was based off of the green projectile slime. This is a red 3-headed boss that shoots 3 projectiles at once. The next wave boss I implemented is based off of the normal summoner enemy, and it summons many more enemies at a much faster rate. Third wave boss I implemented is based off the new bomb goblin enemy. This boss bomb goblin holds a bundle of TNT and gives off quite the fireworks show on detonation. The final wave boss isn't ready to be shown off yet, but will be heavily based off the current drone enemies in the game. I look forward to sharing that boss with you in a future devlog. Once I had finished the bosses, I continued working on adding more regular enemy types to the game. I added a lightning summoner enemy, which summoned bolts of lightning from the sky, which will electrocute the player and stun them if the player touches it. I also added a bomb goblin, which I alluded to earlier, which will wander around the player and eventually explode. Another enemy I added was the small dragon enemy, enemy which shoots fireballs at the player, and if they hit the player will cause a burn status effect. I also added a smaller flower enemy which is basically just a rose plant that poisons the player on contact. And lastly, I added a lava enemy which resembles the current ice enemy but leaves lava coals on the ground which will burn the player if they're stepped on. If you notice, almost every new enemy leaves some sort of status effect on the player when damaging the player. Because having multiple status effects on the player at once can be a bit confusing, I added these little status effect icons above the hotbar when the player is currently inflicted with one of these effects. Now that I fleshed out bosses and the enemy variety in the game, I wanted to expand on the world building aspects, which led me to creating these biome-like zones to this first stage of the game. I feel as if these biomes help the world bosses fit more naturally into their environment, and it allows me to make the world feel less static, which was another major feedback I received during playtesting. So I decided to split the stage into 4 quadrants. The upper leftmost quadrant is a winter biome and is home to the ice boss. When entering this biome, the player's move speed will be slowed and their visibility will be hindered due to the blizzard particles in the sky. The upper right quadrant is vastly different. It's the lava biome, and it consists of streams of lava that force the player to either go around them or be punished by an intense burning status effect if they cross the lava stream. These lava streams greatly interfere with the player's ability to combat the large dragon boss which lives in that zone. The bottomless quadrant is the swamp biome, which is filled with impassable bodies of water and dark stormy weather which reduces its visibility. This area is also home to the large slime boss. The last biome in the bottom right corner of the map is home to the poisonous flower boss and a whole host of other poisonous plants that the player has to avoid while fighting that boss. I'm super happy with how the biomes turned out, and with the addition of flowing river particles, animating the waterfall, and weather systems, I feel like the world feels much more alive. The gameplay was feeling much better now that the environment felt more dynamic, the enemies are more varied, and there were more bosses, and there were even biomes. But I still felt like something was missing. I wanted to add some juice, a little dopamine hit that got the player excited midway through the round. My idea for this was to add a bonus loot mechanic to the loot goblins and make it much more exciting when taking these enemies out. So I added a roulette style UI that appears whenever you knock out a loot goblin. The curtain closes mid-round, the wheel spins, and you can win anything from gold, oxygen, experience, ability levels, more spins, and even unlock an ultimate ability. I also added a disco ball light effect to the goblin when they're running around. This definitely gives you the dopamine hit I was intending, but I'm not sure the casino or carnival style roulette wheel fits into the sci-fi aesthetic of the game. If you have any ideas for a similar mechanic or style I can implement, please let me know in the comments below. I know those were the core features I wanted to talk about in today's devlog, but I made a ton more progress since the last devlog, so I'm going to fire those features off TV commercial fine print style. I added Pokemon style spiral effects to the game screen on game over. I added Steam Cloud save functionality as well as Steam achievements. I added full controller support for the game. I added a settings menu allowing you to adjust the sound effects volume. I made the Astro Shield reflect projectiles back to the enemies. I added a cool little float astronaut to the main menu. I added hotkeys that allow you to use the numpad to select abilities and the escape key to open and close the pause menu. I added a special type of loot that drops from world bosses, destroying all enemies. I added a special type of loot that drops from wave bosses that lets you pick up all XP on the map. I improved the Steam page. Make sure you wishlist the Steam page. Well, that's it for today's devlog. You know what to do. Like, subscribe, and until next time, thanks for watching.